travel a step backwards and get some idea what it would have been like for organisms in the past.
Dr. Rothschild measures the levels of UV radiation.
These readings are amazing. This is the middle of winter, and already we've got extremely high UV readings, and I bet they're going to be even higher by noon. It's just amazing.
Readings here can reach twice the average level of a California beach. And just as our skin is in danger from too much UV when we lie in the sun, the microbes that live here in Bolivia are at constant risk. Rothschild carries out a simple experiment to find out just what they are up against.
What I'm doing now is looking at the effect of ultraviolet radiation from the sun on naked DNA.
The naked DNA is a solution containing DNA molecules stripped of any protection from the cell that would normally surround it.
And then what I'm going to do is seal it up and leave it out in the sun for a few hours.
After just 2 hours of UV bombardment, the DNA molecules show severe damage. Levels of UV on the early Earth would have been around 100 times higher. Many scientists think that our last common ancestor had to live in the dark depths of the ocean or buried under the ground for protection. But the microbes here managed to survive. Their red pigment helps protect their DNA.
Just like we suntan in the summer to protect ourselves, these organisms produce red pigment.
But even though we know that UV radiation is very damaging to the DNA in all living organisms, there's also a flip side. UV radiation may have helped to drive evolution. It might even have had a role in kickstarting the Big Birth and the evolution of the last common ancestor.
Ultraviolet radiation produces mutations. Now, mutations aren't all bad. Without mutations, we wouldn't have evolution. You need to have change in the genetic material to have change in the organisms. And our world, of course, would be very different if nothing had ever changed. We wouldn't be here.
Dr. Rothschild's study of these microbes will help scientists understand how the first organisms survived the hostile conditions on the early Earth, and give a clearer picture of what our last common ancestor was like. But another great mystery remains. How did the last common ancestor form? What is the link between the building blocks of life and the Big Birth? It turns out that some of the answers to that great puzzle may emerge from an extraordinary place in the depths of the ocean. The question of how life began has troubled scientists for centuries. Darwin's theory of evolution explains how species evolved, but we still do not understand how the first living thing was created, how evolution began. Creating life had been the stuff of science fiction.
It's alive! It's alive!
Then in 1953, a bold experiment began the modern scientific investigation into the origin of life. Stanley Miller tries to recreate the conditions of early Earth when scientists think life began. John Chalmers was an associate of Miller and now works in his lab.
Stanley's was the first one to really have a research program directed towards the origin of life. It changed the ideas about the origin of life from mere speculation to a research program.
Since Darwin's time, a lot has been learned about what the planet was like 4 billion years ago. It was an extraordinarily violent time. The Earth had only just formed and was continually bombarded by meteors, asteroids, and comets. And the atmosphere was very different to what we're used to today. Stanley Miller's experiment recreates these conditions in the lab. The flasks contain what Miller believed were the key components of the Earth's early atmosphere: methane, ammonia, and hydrogen. The warm water represents the early ocean. But the key component was a Frankenstein-like bolt of lightning. a simulation of the electric storms that would have raged on the young planet. Miller started the experiment, and the next day, when he returned to the lab, he was in for a shock. The liquid in one of the jars had changed color, and when he analyzed the substance, he found something remarkable. It was packed with chemicals called amino acids, what biologists and chemists call the building blocks of life.
Of course, they're very important because all terrestrial life is made up of amino acids.
Miller's experiment showed how simple molecules could be transformed into the building blocks of life. But these building blocks are still a long way from any kind of life. How do these so-called building blocks create life? One clue was to come from a very special package that was delivered to the Earth from space. In September 1969, the residents of Murchison in southern Australia were startled by a loud bang. A 200-pound meteorite fell into their village, showering it with rock. These small pieces of space rock have been the object of intense study ever since. Dave Deemer at the University of California, Santa Cruz managed to get his hands on a sample.
There was a flash of light in the sky and a rolling thunder, and a few minutes later, the stones of the meteorite just fell all over Murchison, Australia, and there's a strange aroma in the air.
Deemer extracts a compound from his small piece of the meteorite, which has the same aroma.
So when I'm smelling this, I'm smelling an aroma that's 4.57 billion years old. That's the age of the solar system. Now, it's the oldest aroma on Earth, much older than the Earth's surface by about 500 million years. And I'm smelling it. It's got a kind of a old cigar butt smell or dirty sock smell.
The smell gave Professor Deemer a clue that the liquid he had extracted from the meteorite was packed with organic chemicals. When he took this extract and put it under the microscope, he saw something extraordinary.
We see beautiful little glowing vesicles that look just about the right size for a bacterial cell or larger cells.
The extract from the meteorite contained molecules that were able to form tiny bubbles or vesicles. These vesicles looked just like the outer membrane of a small microbe.
Some of the compounds were able to form membranous structures, beautiful little cell-like compartments. And we've proposed then that this would be a way for the first cell membranes to have come about on the early Earth from these sorts of molecules.
Perhaps these compounds, delivered from space, were the first steps on the road to life. But in order to form membranes, these molecules needed to have been in fresh water at just the right concentration. One idea of how this could happen is that they fell near a geyser in a warm volcanic pool. As the water droplets evaporate, the molecules start to become more concentrated and form tiny vesicles. Perhaps these self-assembling cell membranes, delivered from space, were the first steps on the road to life. The transformation of non-living chemicals into the first living cell.
So I don't have any trouble imagining that this would be a common process, and this formation of compartments would have been the first step towards cellular life.
But a simple bubble-like membrane is still a long way from being alive. Scientists still have to figure out how all the complex components that make up a cell came together to create the Big Birth. This time, the answer came from a lost world that had lain undiscovered for nearly 4 billion years. In 1977, a team from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution were looking for signs of volcanic activity on the sea floor, 8,000 feet under the surface of the ocean. Alongside these hydrothermal vents, they also found an incredible undersea world. cut off from the light of the sun, it was thriving with species of plants and animals that had never been seen before. Until that moment, many scientists thought that all living ecosystems depended on photosynthesis. But here was a unique environment completely cut off from sunlight. This strange underwater world captivated Carnegie Institute researcher Dr. Robert Hazen.
And imagine how exciting it was to descend in the submarine into the black depths of the ocean where people thought there was nothing. And they find these hydrothermal vents, these places where volcanic fluids are pouring out of the ocean floor. And not only that, because of all that energy, chemical energy, heat, there's living things, there's ecosystems, life abounds, microbes and tube worms and clams and all sorts of strange crabs and other things.
After searching at these crushing depths, they found unexpected chimney-type stacks emitting plumes of scalding hot water. He had a hunch that these hot vents could be producing some interesting chemistry. Perhaps they could have produced the organic building blocks of life. He set up an experiment to find out.
It's easy to do these experiments. You see, you just take a little bit of mineral, a little bit of chemicals, you put them in a gold tube and seal it up. You put that tube at high temperature and high pressure just for a few hours. Open it up. There's all this stuff inside.
And the stuff he found turned out to be far more exciting than he'd ever imagined.
When we did these experiments, we thought we'd find nothing really very interesting, just a few simple molecules that we could analyze and maybe write a little paper on. We were wrong. This stuff had the strongest aromatic smell. At lower temperature, it was like